Hello everyone, welcome back. Hope you had a great holiday season. IGN just released its first video as part of IGN First for Dragon's Dogma 2, which will display different features and different gameplay for Dragon's Dogma 2 all throughout the month of January. As the first one is just released this past Wednesday, I figured it would be a great time to go over some of the new features that I noticed in this new gameplay feature. Now, when I say new, I know that there are those of you who have played the game in demos, and I know that there are even some of you who have witnessed even further details than I have here. So when I say new, I mean new to what I've displayed on the channel and new to the larger community of Dragon's Dogma 2. Nevertheless, I do expect someone at least once to comment that we've already seen something that I'll point out before, but I don't care, so here we go. We're going to follow the order of the IGN video as far as things that I've noticed. I would highly recommend you watch the entire thing yourself. It's over 18 minutes long. I will say that the gameplay did make me want to puke a few times, but as far as new features go and new gameplay goes, it should hold you over for at least a week, although I won't blame you if it doesn't. The gameplay video starts out with the fighter vocation, and immediately we see that they have two skills equipped, which will be important for context later whenever we look at the warrior. Basically, in the warrior gameplay, we only see two skills for him. So for some people that might ignite fears that there are only going to be two skills for the warrior vocation, but since we see two skills only for the fighter, and we know that there's a maximum of 4 that you can equip, and this is shown later, so we can rest assured that warrior itself will also have 4 skills maximum. The other thing to note here is that the fighter gameplay actually is not part of any demo that we've seen in the past, whereas previously the fighter vocation started out at level 15 with a beastren character. This is a brand new human character, and this is around the same level range that the archer vocation was at during all the demos that we saw. So immediately we can see that the enemy scaling is quite high in the early game, which is something that I really like. Immediately the Arisen can drop almost to half of his loss gauge, which it can only be replenished whenever you're at a campsite or an inn and you rest. It doesn't actually recover from any skills or from any items that you consume, which is something that I've pointed out in a previous video, but it's good to see it spelled out for us here in this shot. Another cool feature that I've noticed is that the camera actually blends out some of these trees whenever they're in the foreground. This is something I've noticed that more games are starting to do and not enough currently do, so I'm very happy that this is the case because there's nothing worse than getting your camera hitched on some sort of tree or rock in the background. Eventually in the gameplay, they encounter the same Cyclops from the trailer, which immediately after seeing this, we already know we take the explosive cask here and blow up the waterfall dam to then sweep away the Cyclops and knock it out for the rest of the fight. There's nothing particularly new shown during this fight, but at one point the character actually opens up the inventory and we see a few new items. So as you can see here, we have Scrag of Beast, which now increases health instead of stamina. We also see Fruit Reborn, which does the same thing, and we get a glimpse at Copper Ore, which can be used to upgrade weapons. And the last thing I want to point out is after the Cyclops battle, and that is the level up screen, which levels up to level 8. This is further confirmation that this Cyclops fight takes place in the early game. And that's about it for the fighter vocations. Let's jump over to the next section, which is the thief. In the thief section, I noticed 4 main features here. The first being that while the thief is climbing on the Cyclops, there actually doesn't appear to be any stamina drain when you get to the point where you can stand on monsters. So while you are climbing and clinging onto monsters, once you get to the point where you no longer have to use your hands, the stamina bar actually builds up like normal. And it is at this point where you can use regular weapon skills as well. So for those players who want to use some of your bigger weapon skills on something like, say, the warrior, you're able to do it once you're finally able to stand on the monster you're on instead of clinging and just pummel bashing the entire time. Later on, we see a pawn of some sort or an assistant actually rip off Cyclops armor, which is an interesting little interaction. It seems to suggest that pawns will be able to more eloquently interact with the enemies that they are facing. It's my hope that this is some sort of interaction you can use with the grab ability whenever the enemy is staggered or something like that, but either way it's nice to see it make an appearance. Another thing I saw here could be a bug or it could be a feature. It seems that when the Cyclops actually has a pawn gripped in its paw, in the middle of its throw it actually clips into the Arisen, and then the Arisen is thrown from the Cyclops instead of the pawn. This is something I think we'll have to wait for full release to see if it's actually a bug or not, but maybe it's just something to do with the demo. I don't know at this point, but hopefully that gets patched. And finally, after a brutal execution animation, we get a level up screen for the thief vocation, which seems to confirm that we are are following very closely to the Dragon's Dogma 1 design of level up stats. So this is a level up screen for level 9, and as you can see on the Thief vocation, you would imagine that this would follow more of a strength and stamina type leaning towards the stat growth, but we actually see a low amount of health, a low amount of stamina, and more of an increase towards magical defense, which is something I did not anticipate. This seems to indicate that we're following more of a general stat growth from level 1 to 10 based on the different demo information that we've seen in the past, and from level 10 to 100 it seems to heavily weight towards what vocation you actually have equipped to then determine what kind of stat growth you will get upon level up. I say that for now, however we will see a different sort of trend whenever we get into the Sorcerer gameplay that might contradict that, but more on that later. Moving on to the Warrior gameplay, this is something that most of you probably haven't seen yet before, so let's start with the heavy attack and light attack here. So Stone Splitter seems to be the basic heavy attack that we have, and Mighty Sweep is the light attack. We also have the Barge, which is confirmed to be a vocation action here. As we'll see later on, Stone Splitter is more of a vertical strike attack that brings your sword up and over to crash down on your enemies. Mighty Sweep is actually chargeable and can be used in a horizontal fashion, and Barge is used mainly to stagger enemies and absorb knockdown. So as we get into the fight, the first thing you're going to notice is that the Ogre dropkick is actually insane. It seems like it follows the same traits as it did in the previous demos that we've seen, in that it travels a very far distance and the damage that you get from this is absolutely massive. Now, aside from the horrible gameplay that we see, we also get a glimpse of Skyward Sunder, which is more of a jumping skill where you bring your sword up and then crash it down once you land. And this is what I was mentioning before. You can see on the Warrior there are only 2 skills revealed. However, we do know from experience in other clips that there will be 4 skills total, so nothing to worry about here. As we move on further into the fight, you can see a good glimpse of the jumps Stone Splitter attack, and throughout the fight as you watch it, I would definitely recommend watching this whole thing on the IGN channel, but the Ogre seems to have a lot of stone slamming attacks that are more of an area of effect than they did in previous game, and it should also be noted that there are no women in this character's party, so that is why the Ogre is not going crazy over one particular character. Now, one thing we do notice a few times here in this fight is that the Arisen gets ragdolled, and it appears that when the Arisen gets ragdolled and they land on a surface, they actually need help from their pawn to immediately recover. If a pawn is not there, they seem to enter into this animation that is reminiscent of "help, I've fallen and I can't get up," and they seem to just crawl on the ground until they come to their senses. Hopefully they have an item in game or some sort of armor that mitigates this so that I can do a lot of solo runs, but if not, I guess it just comes with the solo run. There's also a cool little part here where an ox cart can run into battle with you and start fighting the Ogre with you. So there's actually like an army of 8 people trying to take down this Ogre, which is insane. This also is a good indicator that the world of Dragon's Dogma 2 is living and breathing, and there are little interactions that can happen like this organically. This doesn't appear to be scripted. This also might indicate that you can hop on an ox cart in the middle of its traveling, but maybe not. We'll have to see whenever the game fully releases. I just really like this kind of feature because it reminds me of the Skyrim days where you could fight a whole horde of bandits and some random Imperial patrol will be traveling nearby and they just join into the fight. So I really like this kind of thing. It really adds to the fantasy element and the idea that the world is living and breathing without you in it. Later on in the fight against the Ogre, we see that there's some sort of magical rune that the mage or sorcerer character is placing on the Ogre here that explodes at a later time. Very similar to how Powder Charge works on the Thief vocation, although it doesn't seem to be as powerful. Interesting little skill I thought I would point out here. We also see what seems to be a lightning version of the High Flagration skill, where a mage will cast out different fans of flames, and in this case there are just straight lightning bolts firing from the sorcerer instead of from above whenever you cast High Levin. So this seems to indicate that there is a new sorcerer skill that we'll be learning about later on. It's not in this gameplay clip, although we hopefully will get more information a little bit later. And lastly, we have the Warrior level up screen, which is a level up to level 11. This seems to indicate that we will be able to access the Warrior vocation at level 10, which is right in line with how Dragon's Dogma 1 was, where you could access advanced and hybrid vocations once you reach level 10. And again, we see the stat growth for the Warrior vocation. We have a heavy weighting towards health and a heavy weighting towards strength, which is right in line with what I would think. And last but not least, we got to talk about the Sorcerer vocation, which is a very cool set of clips here, although the gameplay, again, makes me want to puke. So first thing we'll notice about the Sorcerer is that there's actually no vocation action for the Sorcerer, and we do not know if it's because it's not assigned or if it's because they literally don't have one. That that's yet to be seen. Although we can see immediately that the light attack for Sorcerer is Magic Bolt, similar to Mage, and Galvanize is actually the heavy attack for Sorcerer. I'll just go ahead and jump ahead and mention it now. Galvanize is actually a chargeable skill that allows you to recover stamina at a faster rate. Before, I had some misgivings that it would be something to buff your teammates in the form of defense, but in this case, it seems that we can, instead of moving around waiting for stamina to recover, we can simply concentrate and allow our stamina recovery to be much faster. This is leaning heavily into Sorcerer being a major damage dealer, and I am all for it. Jumping back to where we were in the gameplay, we see a new skill called Hagel, which actually is just a hailstorm that appears wherever the Arisen is casting. We can see this used in tandem with the quick spell vocation action. I think it's considered a vocation action, not quite sure if it's just a core skill, but in any case, it seems to hyperfixate on the skill that you're using and seems to speed up the casting speed. Who could have guessed a skill named Quick Spell actually allows you to cast spells quicker? We can also see that High Flagration makes a return, which is just the fanning of flames that we see on the Mage class again. And we also get a new skill called Salamander, which is similar to Combustion, except that it seems to spray the flames in a line straight in front of the Arisen as opposed to a horizontal wall of flame. Moving on, we do see that Warrior actually has a Spring Step move, which is similar to what Fighter had in Dragon's Dogma 1, and the amount of air that you get from this is actually massive. Following up from that, we see a nice display of the High 11 skill, and something that is new here is that High 11 actually has follow-up attacks, so you can spam to repeatedly cast bolts on your target, which will drain additional stamina but will deal additional damage. Now, one thing we do not know is how many skills this will apply to for mages and sorcerers. It might just be something for sorcerers, who knows, but this is a very nice addition, I will say, as I too like to spam different sorts of spells at my enemies, and the fact that you can do it repeatedly as long as you have a stamina source is great news to me. Towards the end of the Sorcerer clip, we also see its level up screen here, and it appears that we actually have a focus across all different stats, and it seems to favor strength above all the other stats. This strikes me as very odd, as in the first game, Sorcerer would heavily favor magic. It was actually the best class to level magic as stat growth. And in this case, strength is actually the stat that wins out over all the others. So it's at this point in the video where I will say that stat growth, it seems to follow whatever vocation that you have chosen, that it will be heavily weighted towards whatever vocation you happen to be playing at the time. But this sort of lends the idea that maybe your style of gameplay will more heavily affect how your stat grows, and how will they track that? Not entirely sure. This might end up being a point where I just say, let's wait for the final release before making any final conclusions on what stat growth will look like in Dragon's Dogma 2, because this kind of throws me for a loop. If you have any additional information that you've seen elsewhere, please let me know in the comments, because I'm very interested in finding out how stat growth works. And lastly, I didn't really intend for this to be part of the video, but I guess since people are talking about it on Reddit and other places, the armor that the Sorcerer vocation is wearing doesn't seem to indicate that there will actually be any shared sets from Warrior or Fighter. We did see in earlier demos that different sorts of armor will be available to different sorts of vocation. It's not something that's available to every single vocation. Like, say, if you have heavy plate armor, it won't immediately be available to an archer, for example. And I've seen it said that this particular armor set is just a set that the Arisen can wear on any specific vocation. So this seems to be a special case, but I would not imagine that you can just randomly equip some heavy sort of armor onto a mage or a sorcerer vocation. It seems to be more in line with what the first game was going for. Of course, I'm open to be proven wrong, but we won't know anything until more footage comes out or the final release gets here, whatever comes first. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to look in the description and go see the new IGN gameplay for yourself if you haven't already. I'm sure most of you have by now, but anyway, that's going to do it for me. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.